to Expanding Your Faith, a podcast that tackles modern-day issues with a focus on spirituality, with Bishop Greer Godsey, Reverend Marc Trimm, Father Matt Schnabel, and Bishop Ben Williams. Thanks for listening. Take a breath, open your heart, and let's expand your faith together.
Welcome to this edition of Expanding Your Faith. I'm Bishop Greer, and joining me this evening is Reverend Marc.
Greetings, everyone.
And tonight we're going to be talking about sanctuary, what the church owes the vulnerable. But first of all, I want to remind everyone that you can always listen to our podcast at pod.myocci.social or on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcast from. We're on just about every platform out there. Just search us up as Expanding Your Faith. So the word sanctuary has become a politically charged word, but it is first and foremost a theological word. And the church does not get to outsource its meaning to cable news or politicians. So who are those that are vulnerable right now? Undocumented immigrants, unhoused people, homeless people, LGBTQIA youth, rejected by their families and their friends, people fleeing domestic violence, people exiled from their own religious communities. Those are all vulnerable people in our society right now. The question tonight is not primarily political, it's a question of ecclesiology. What does the church owe people who have nowhere else to go? And Reverend Marc, what does sanctuary look like from where you minister?
Well, it takes on a lot of different forms. It's really hard to just pull back and to say that, MCC, where my pastor is this or that alone. It's kind of a chuckle for us at our church that we're known as the quote unquote the gay church.
Right.
But we're so much more than that. We have people there that aren't necessarily identifying as gay, but there are people that are the allies. There are people there that are straight. There are people there that are questioning, bisexual. They encompass all of the alphabet mafia, as they say.
Right.
And our goal is to create a space, a safe space for people to experience the love of God.
Right.
The inclusive love of God specifically. And that is going to reach in so many different places because of the nature of who we've received, their background. Many of our people have experienced religious trauma, at the bare minimum, rejection from various religious groups. And not to mention, society as a whole. We have people that have been fired by being who they are, coming out, declaring who they love. We have people shunned, people not given jobs, people just within the, outside of the church setting. So sanctuary is looking to it's a place which we look to bring healing, a place that we look to offer safety in a spiritual setting. And that has many different, that takes on many different forms. And so it's vital that we offer that and that we don't exclude anyone. That's our goal, is to do the best that we can to not exclude anyone, which can be a tall order, because when you start saying we don't want to exclude anyone, and you start thinking of who anyone could be that comes in your door, that can be exciting. It can also be a little scary.
Absolutely. In our parish, we also are very inclusive and welcoming of everyone of every walk of life, much like the MCC. Although our focus primarily has been on the homeless and immigrants, those who are currently marginalized. But we welcome everyone, anyone who feels called by the Spirit to be part of our congregation. And being a sanctuary place, as you said, is not easy because that includes everyone, even those people that don't look like us, act like us, talk like us, even believe like us in some ways.
Right.
One of the questions I want everyone listening to hold on to through the episode, and we'll come back at the end to it, so be thinking about it throughout the episode. If Jesus showed up at your church door at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, who would he bring with him? Who would Jesus bring with him? So let's look at the biblical roots of sanctuary. The first thing we're going to look at is the cities of refuge, the oldest sanctuary framework. Numbers 35, 9 through 15, God commands Moses to establish 6 refugee cities throughout the land where someone fleeing blood vengeance could find safety until a fair hearing. This was important. It is not a metaphor, it's a legal structure built into covenant community. The cities of refuge were not just for Israelites. Numbers 35:15 explicitly includes the newcomer and the sojourner, the immigrant and the foreigner could come to these cities of refuge listed in Numbers 35 and receive sanctuary, protection. Sanctuary was not a courtesy the community offered. It was a covenant obligation. Covenant obligation. The stranger, the orphan, and the widow are another 3 that are routinely mentioned as vulnerable people in the Hebrew Scriptures. The resident, alien, or stranger, the orphan, and the widow. Deuteronomy 10:18 through 19 says, he does the judgment of the fatherless and the widow. He loves the stranger, giving them food and clothing. Therefore, love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. The reason given is not humanitarian sentiment. It is memory and identity. You know what it is to be vulnerable in this place because you went through that. You experienced that yourself. So don't forget that. This moves sanctuary from charity to solidarity. We do not help the stranger because we are better than them. We help the stranger because we have been them. We know what it's like. We know what it's like to be denied sanctuary. Reverend Mark?
I want to piggyback on one thing you said there, because I love how the scripture does remind them, we're setting up a place for folks to have safety, sanctuary, to place to come, and then draws back and reminds them that they too were in a place, strangers at one point in the land, and reminding them of how they were treated, as they moved away from the likes of Joseph, that they were then treated pretty harshly. And so, connecting them back to that. I always like that passage of scripture where there's a connection back, because it's easy for us to step back and be like, oh, well, we're doing great. And now that we're doing better, then we're going to start shunning other people. And there's always the connection back and going, you could have been in a place and still in that place that is less than where you are. So don't look down on those people that are in that position. And Jesus was very clear in the book of Matthew that we were to welcome those strangers. We were to welcome those people that weren't like us. He taught that both in word by speaking and teaching people. And then he demonstrated it to them. You know, he actually ate with, who sat down at tables with throughout his ministry. You know, when he fed the multitudes, he didn't go around and make sure that they were of the right faith, belief, look, ethnicity, so on and so forth. He still fed them. And, you know, prior to ascension, as he was winding down, he told them, you know, that I was a stranger. Towards the end of his days, I was the stranger, and you were to welcome me. I was in prison. Those are the people that we're supposed to go out and seek out, not just them come to us, but to seek out. Jesus doesn't say that he was represented in the stranger, that he was the stranger. He was the outcast. And from the get-go, from the book of Luke, Jesus immediately tells us that he's there to bring good news, not to those that have it all together, but to the poor. You can look at that verse and say he brings good news to the poor, and that's just, you know, economics. But that's true. That can be interpreted that. I think poor encompasses, you know, even everybody that's poor in spirit, poor in mind, poor in heart, and to proclaim the release of captives, liberty to the oppressed. And so there's no limit to that. So we want to help those that are literally captives, a releasing within their hearts and spirits of whatever got them to that place. And so we see that need, particularly with MCC, we see that need because for many years, for hundreds of years, thousands of years, people that were up under the LGBTQIA, you know, how they identified and who they are, were shunned by spiritual leaders. And, you know, we're made more aware of that now because how we keep up with things that happen around us. Literally, you know, shown the doors of churches. You know, you can't come or kept from entering the doors of some churches in some cases. And, you know, that's how MCC was founded. Our church, our founder, Reverend Elder Troy Perry, found groups of people, and he found, you know, it was heavy on his heart. He had as they used to say, a burden for the people that had nowhere to go, but they still wanted a spiritual walk with God. And they sought that spiritual walk, but weren't welcomed in places of worship to explore that, to expand upon their faith. And so he took it with the call of God, with the urging of the Spirit, I believe, to find a way to create a safe space, to create sanctuary for those that were downtrodden, those that were cast aside, and those that weren't welcome. And that's how MCC was started. And, you know, that is still our goal for the day, is that people know that they are completely welcome at all times in our churches. And that there's a space prepared for them, particularly when we receive communion.
Absolutely. It's even written on the altar. All are welcome.
That's right.
Right there on the front of the altar. The temple in Jerusalem functioned as a literal sanctuary. A person could go inside the temple and grab the horns of the altar to claim protection from immediate execution. 1 Kings 1:50 through 51, Adonijah flees to the altar when his life is threatened. The physical space of worship was coded as a place where violence could not follow you. And so when churches declare themselves as sanctuary congregations today, they're not being radical, they're not being political, they are recovering a practice that is older than Christianity itself. And, you know, we have our jurisdiction, we have sanctuary parishes in them where that has been true, and where people have been able to come and receive sanctuary who are being hunted And so we believe that's a very important part of the church's function because it harkens back to this command in the Old Testament. So let's look at how the church has practiced sanctuary throughout history. Sanctuary in the early and medieval church, by the 4th century, the right of sanctuary in church buildings was recognized across the Roman Empire. Emperor Constantine and later Theodosius codified it into law. A person who reached a church could not be forcibly removed. They had to be allowed to remain there and to be granted sanctuary. Bishops like Ambrose of Milan, who died in 397, physically stood between imperial soldiers and people seeking refuge at great personal risk. The sanctuary extended not just inside the building, but across the church grounds, sometimes including surrounding land. And this was not a radical or fringe idea. It was a standard Christian practice for over 1,000 years in the church, that sanctuary was given to anyone who came to the church for sanctuary. Reverend Mark?
Yeah, and you know, we see that throughout history. We see even you know, as we're going through our own history here in America, the most one of the most hated and marginalized and ostracized group, our African American brothers and sisters, were, you know, begging for justice and freedom during the time of slavery. That bore or that birthed, excuse me, the Underground Railroad, where many churches took it upon themselves to help set free those that were in the southern states and get them to over to the quote unquote free states in America at their own risk, at their own personal risk. Sometimes it was just one person who would go rescue one person or two people or three and so on. Smaller numbers, you know, would get you obviously a little have a little bit more success, but they would, you know, do as many as they could. And about 100,000, it's estimated about 100,000 more and more African Americans were rescued from plantations and from the cruelty because of the Underground Railroad. And it can't be overlooked at the amount of people that stepped in because they were moved with compassion and a sense of justice. People of faith, in particularly, if not just about every person that stepped up. And you know, the African American community in church, particularly in America, has such an amazing impact and history, beautiful history. I when I was years ago, when I traveled a lot and ministered in churches, I tended to go into more African American churches than I did in white churches. At one point, my congregation for my first pastorate was 60% African American. And love, you know, it was wonderful that the fact that we were all worshiping together, and it, you know, it wasn't this big issue. And so MCC, we have tons of African American pastors, lay ministers, congregants, and so again, they've been rejected by, particularly during the time of slavery, Christianity as a whole, because, you know, it was allowed to continue, and they would pull out scripture to try to beat them over the head with it. But here we have the opportunity for people of various colors to come in and to embrace the freedom to stand before God authentically, just as God made you to be, and to worship. And they have no fear of, being called out, ridiculed, escorted out, all the things that happen in churches, and that's a safe and sacred space. The sanctuary has to be sacred. When you go back and you study the tabernacle of Moses, which then transitioned over into the temple that lived even up through the practice of the temple that made it all the way to Jesus' time. There's some destruction here and there, but then rebuilt. But the tabernacle of Moses from the get-go was called sanctuary. There's a couple of words used for it, but it meant a place that was holy, a place that was sacred, a place that was set apart, and that represented where God would dwell. And then we know through our Christian teachings that God wanted that sanctuary, that holy place, to move from a building into our hearts, that we were the sanctuary, we were the sacred space for the divine, and to carry that with us. And so we're the mobile, we're the mobile homes, if you will, the mobile home for the divine moving around. And so our presence should create sanctuary. Our presence should create a sacred and safe space for all people when they come into our presence.
Absolutely. And the modern sanctuary movement that started in the 1980s, American churches sheltered Salvadorian and Guatemalan refugees fleeing U.S.-backed violence in Central America. These modern sanctuary movements were led by people like Jim Corbett and John Fife, Presbyterian pastors who were persecuted by the federal government for harboring those refugees.
Right.
Approximately 500 congregations across traditions declared sanctuary, and several ministers, pastors, clergy were convicted for aiding people in that sanctuary movement. The interesting thing about it is their defense was explicitly theological. They argue the law of God supersedes the law of the state where those laws conflict, citing Acts 5:29. We ought to obey God rather than men. So they fought these charges based solely on their understanding of Scripture. The movement has been resurrected after 2016 and continues today, with hundreds of congregations currently holding that designation throughout the United States and abroad. But we cannot forget the fact that in times past, the church has also been the persecutor.
Right.
Things like the Inquisition, the criminalization of LGBTQIA plus individuals from church pulpits. We just recently saw that fight between within the United Methodist Church, which led to the split of the United Methodist Church. The complicity of German churches under National Socialism, which we're getting ready to start a book study in about a week from now on Dietrich Bonhoeffer's The Cost of Discipleship. Bonhoeffer was one of those German clergymen who stood against National Socialism. And he wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship. And so we're going to be doing that book study here very soon. Sanctuary is not the church's default setting, sadly. It has to be chosen, defended, and sometimes recovered from abandonment. This means the conversation, not triumphalist, but urgent. The church can choose sanctuary or it can choose complicity. And the history books have shown that we've done both in our time.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the great dichotomy of the church, right?
Well, and I can't say this because I wouldn't say I'm a historian, but I would say a lot of times when the church has been focused on power and linking up with that power, or just wanting to be a power broker of its own, we tend to drift over to exclusion, because power has to be sustained somewhere and somehow. Power has to have, resources, has to have money, has to have the ability to keep going. And it's so sad because then you start, gravitating over towards the individuals that have that, and you compromise churches. The church historically has compromised who it is and its beliefs, its teachings, and compromised being just like Jesus in order to embrace that power, right, in order to embrace wealth and embrace money. A lot of that's going on. And so it's that's still today in elements. There's a lot of churches that stand up like ours, like yours, that stand up and say, no, everyone's welcome, everyone can come, so on and so forth. But it also reminds us of our past where we've elevated things and power above the children of God.
Right.
And the children of God are not just those that are well educated. They're not just those that have wealth. They're not just those that have power. The children of God are every person, all of humanity. And when we turn a blind eye to that, we have the things like the Crusades. We have the things like slavery.
Right.
Slavery still exists in our world today, even in our time of enlightenment.
Right.
And it's very sad. And the church just, as long as we have people filling the pews on Sunday morning, we don't, a lot of folks don't care. But Jesus does. Right. God does.
So what does sanctuary look like today? So one of the things that we are is a safe space congregation. We're also somewhat a sanctuary congregation in Augusta, Georgia. Some of the practical elements of that are knowing our rights as a congregation, what ICE can and cannot do on church property, and having a plan if a situation arises. We put notices on the doors of the church before our services that make it very clear that ICE does not have the right to enter the church without a judicial warrant. It's a warrant signed by a judge in order to be, that sanctuary for people, and we also make sure that our congregants know their rights under the law, that they do not have to speak to ICE agents. They do not have to disclose information about themselves unless that agent has a warrant for their arrest. And it's not just for immigration. Sanctuary from domestic violence, from predatory systems, from housing instability. The church is the first response node in the community. Before we even started there at MCC, we are there at MCC for our services. MCC has these signs in their bathrooms, which I love. It has all the information about the church, the phone numbers for local law enforcement, and everything in case somebody comes in who's been in a domestic violence situation. We live, Augusta, Georgia is on a human trafficking pipeline. So in case somebody's being trafficked or something, that information is there so that they can reach out to law enforcement in a safe way and get them there. And we do what we can to help protect that person until law enforcement can come and assist in the situation. And that's an important part of this sanctuary theology and mentality. Isn't that right, Reverend Mark?
Yeah, MCC linked up with several churches that brought a lawsuit, and that lawsuit stated that, reaffirming that federal agents are not permitted without warrants to enter into our sanctuary, that they are not allowed to do so, and they're not allowed to come on property in order to deport people, ICE, particularly immigration. And, we do the best that we can because we understand the exclusion as a LGBTQIA community. We understand the exclusion and watching exclusive people look down towards us. The queer community, LGBTQI, I call it queer community because it takes a minute to say all of the letters. The queer community is very aware because we've experienced so much being unhomed, kicked out in our youth. We at a higher rate, young people are kicked out of homes, even still today, excluded from faith communities, from our transgender brothers and sisters and friends, siblings. They experiencing huge discrimination right now, and we would rather exclude people than try to find ways to make the cost of living lower. I mean, you think about it. What's on our top list here in America, excluding people versus trying to help the nation as a whole afford to live. That shows you where priority is. But we understand that, standing up for those that have been thrown out, kicked aside, looked down upon. I mean, that's at the heart of what MCC was founded to do. Back in 1968, the same year Dr. King was gunned down. We started, he was standing up for the marginalized, and we decided to do our part for what we felt was important. And, and I encourage people every Sunday that we get to come to a safe and sacred space. And I use these words: you can be authentic. We can worship authentically. You can hold the hand of the person you love. You can come to the altar and receive at the table of Christ, whether you're a member of our church or of any church. The table was made and instituted by the divine for that purpose, because there's such, looking at people because they're different and saying, no, you can't participate in God's love, is totally departed from the message of Jesus. It drives people to unalive themselves. It drives people to seclude themselves. It drives people to never want to grow in their faith with God. And I never have understood churches that have stepped back, and if they perceive, again, I'm talking about churches perceiving that being LGBTQI is wrong. That's their perception. I'm not saying that it's wrong. We're all loved by God. We're all embraced by the divine. It's not wrong. But those churches that perceive that, to kick them out and to tell them they can't worship is so illogical. Because if you believe that whatever you're doing there helps change our lives and pushes us towards God, then why would you not want them to come and experience God? And well, we know the answer, because it's not wrong. It's not wrong to be who God created us to be. And so, that they're not kicking people out for God's sake. They're kicking people out because of their comfort, because of who they are versus who that person is. And so it's so, I've had people sit in my office after coming to our church saying that this is the first time they've been to church in years or decades for some folks. I had one person sit in my office recently and say, thank you for being a pastor that I can trust and not worry that you're going to come down on me for being who I am or kicking me out. And I'm like, I mean, why would the shepherd try to kick the sheep out? Because then we got to go after the sheep. It's creating more work for us, because Jesus told us to go after the sheep. And so, my goal is not to scatter so that I have to go do more work. My goal is to get you in the presence of God, listening to the Spirit of God, and let God do the work. My job is to point people to the divine. and to create that atmosphere, to create that space in which they can come and hear, they can come and receive, they can come and listen. Not to badger people and to beat people up, but to create that space where they know that they can be who they are because God made them that way, and they can listen to the divine. And creating that sanctuary, it is sacred, and God views it as holy. It's a holy thing to create sanctuary for people who are completely different than us to come and to receive from the same God that we receive from.
Amen. 100%. And so part of our ministry on Green Street in Augusta is the congregation is a sanctuary for people who have nowhere to go, for the homeless and the poor. Right. The theological problem with we refer people to services, the early church did not outsource care, it embodied it. Now,
right.
We also understand that churches like ours that are so small don't have all the resources. But we partner with other churches and other ministries and other organizations that can provide services to people.
Right.
And we make sure that those services get to people.
Yep.
Practical sanctuary for unhoused neighbors, food, presence, dignity, prayer, access to the sacraments without dress code or address requirement are all important parts of our ministry.
Yeah.
We don't have a dress code. If somebody comes in smelling like they just bathed in the sewer, they are just as welcome to receive communion as a person who comes in wearing Chanel number 5.
That's right. Well, Chanel number 5 might be a little strong too.
Yeah, depending on how much they use, right? So, right. We don't turn anyone away. Isaiah 58:7 says, "Break your bread with the hungry and lead the homeless poor into your house. When you see one who is naked, cover him, and do not despise your own flesh." In other words, those people are part of us, part of the body of Christ, part of who we are as people, and how we treat them speaks to our true level of spirituality, our true connection with the divine. Because if we are truly connected with the divine, we will not marginalize those who are poor and homeless and those who are marginalized by other churches and organizations. We will take them in, we will care for them, and we will do everything we can to support them. Reverend Mark?
Can I take it one step further?
Go right ahead.
In the Old Testament, there was a practice, there was a law that when you harvest your field, that you left some of that harvest there for the people that need it, the wanderer, the sojourner, the poor among us, to come and glean from that field. In other words, to come harvest what they needed too.
Right.
So it is well established that we are to reach out to those that are vulnerable, to those that are susceptible to being, coerced because they're in need, to offer them what they need, to offer them the grace of our blessings. And so that extends even beyond, creating a safe space for them. And they were not to be run off. They were not to be arrested for coming onto your property to glean from.
Right.
How radical is that? I mean,
that's amazing, isn't it?
It'd be like somebody coming into your home and pulling something out of your pantry that doesn't know you because, they're in need.
Right.
I mean, that's so foreign to us.
It is. Absolutely. You want to talk for a moment about religious trauma, Reverend Mark?
Oh yeah, we we had a whole get together in our fall session about religious trauma, overcoming religious trauma. It is a big issue. It's huge. You have people that stepping aside from being LGBTQIA queer. You have just regular people, other people, folks that just go to church that have had varying levels of abuses, whether it's mental, physical, maybe sexual in nature. And those traumas exist within the church. There's a lot of people that bash our Catholic friends, but they're not the only ones. They're not the only people. Just because these independent churches are smaller and their networks are smaller doesn't mean that when you put them all together that they're less than what we have seen in other nominal churches for trauma. And so you have a place to where you're telling people you can come with your guard down, you can come and be completely safe. But then someone takes advantage of them, someone does things to them, and it causes this. I can't imagine the mental breaking that happens, the spiritual breaking that happens to people, to where when they're supposed to go to a place of safety, and in that place of safety find the divine, but some of the worst things in their life transpire in those four walls or in the presence of those individuals that were supposed to create a safe space. And so what happens is you have people that, like we have at MCC, stayed out of church for years. They didn't hate God, but they couldn't stand God's children, what God's kids did to them. And so you're dealing with people that when we do certain things in church, it triggers them back to that moment. Those, when we do things that are similar in nature, they go back to what happened to them, within the four walls of the church, in an office or something. I had one person tell me they couldn't meet me in the pastor's office because something had happened to them in a pastor's office, and asked if we could go have coffee instead. Heck yeah, we'll do that. I like coffee. So, so those things are real. And what it does is it pulls people away from the beauty of community, and it yanks people away from the growth in their spiritual walk, which I believe brings us to wholeness. And sanctuary trauma, or trauma that has happened in sanctuaries, can be very difficult to overcome. And we as ministers, we as people that love our communities, have to embrace embrace the spirit of patience and walk with those individuals, and know that there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of layers there. And if we really care, we will find a way to go above and beyond to make sure that our place is not just sacred, but is also safe.
Absolutely.
And I would say that if we don't make our place safe, it's not sacred.
That's right. I agree. The false choice between evangelism and social justice is a modern evangelical invention, by the way. The early church didn't recognize that. Justin Martyr describes the Sunday collection going directly to widows, orphans, sick, prisoners, and strangers. The community was to be a community of care within the same community. You're supposed to take care of the people around them. Sanctuary is a proclamation. When a church is the only place a transgender teenager or an undocumented mother or an unhoused veteran is treated as fully human being, that is the gospel made visible. Is the gospel made visible. It does not need a sermon attached to it. That is the sermon.
Right.
St. Francis of Assisi, which, is the patron of our parish and also somebody that I admire greatly, some of his teachings were summed up in, preach the gospel always, use words if necessary. In other words, live your life in a way that you are the gospel message to others.
That's right. Yep.
So
and there's times that the community can do more just by connecting than I can from the pulpit.
Absolutely.
And that's beautiful. That's beautiful to me. I mean, they have no clue what I just said. The fact that everybody hugged them, loved them, and gave them a donut when they walked in the door did more than my, 15, 20 minutes of rambling.
That's right.
That's beautiful.
So what are some of the hard questions? Well, here's some hard questions. Doesn't sanctuary put the congregation at legal risk? Well, yes, potentially. That's part of what makes it costly discipleship rather than comfortable Christianity. That difference, as Bonhoeffer points out, between cheap grace and costly grace. But Acts 5:29 is clear. We ought to obey God rather than men. So the question is not whether there is a risk, it's whether the church has always chosen safety over faithfulness, or what we think of the churches that did. On a practical note, knowing the actual legal landscape matters. Congregations are not required to be reckless, but they are required to be honest about what they will and will not do. Some churches, for instance, won't give somebody who comes to the door for assistance cash because, there's a chance they could use that cash to harm themselves or harm others, but will give them a gift card to a grocery store or to a gas station or to a restaurant.
Right.
Don't we have to follow the law? Romans 13 is always cited here, and it's always cited without Romans 12, amazingly, which precedes it and commands, do not conform yourself to the world. The same Paul who wrote Romans 13 was imprisoned repeatedly for civil disobedience.
Right.
The biblical framework is not blanket obedience to the state. It is discernment about when the state serves justice and when it contradicts it. For instance, in our tradition, the Old Catholic tradition, resistance to papal overreach is itself an act of refusing to submit to institutional authority when it conflicts with conscience. Reverend Mark?
Yeah, and a lot of times people will, especially churches that are smaller, and they have limited availability or resources. Our particular church, we physically don't have the space to house a pantry, food pantry.
Right.
But we find ways. We do bags, blessing bags that are filled with necessities. We offer people food that come in on our most Sundays. We have something of substance for them to eat, whether it's little breakfast goodies or potluck Sundays. They're always welcome for that. We'll even send them away with something to eat. But it's beyond just doing things. It's making sure that your attitude, that your posturing, that your just the atmosphere is charged with you're welcome,
Right.
with you're here. Our church does a great job at that. Your church does a great job at that. And, God's not asking us to feed the whole world. He's asking us to make an impact in our, our world. You don't have to change everybody. You don't have to love or make the impact for everybody. You just have to impact the people that you're assigned to. You have to impact in the area that you're assigned to. God knows that I can't go and make an impact in a place over in Africa. I don't have that ability. I don't have the resources, but that doesn't make me just step back and lay down on the couch and go, well, I can't do anything since I can't go over there. No, you step back and say, what can I do here where I'm planted, where I'm positioned, the place that I'm assigned to? And that's the same mindset that a church should have, is what can we do? God looks at success in reaching people a lot different than we do. We only think that reaching people successfully is if we have thousands of folks following us, thousands of people giving to us, thousands of people patting us on the back. Remember, the same Jesus that fed the 5,000 visited the woman at the well with no audience and still ministered to her. So we need to have that same mindset that no matter who God sends to us, whether it's the 1,000 or the one, our heart is still driven to love, to accept, and to embrace.
That's right. And lastly, what about congregational safety? Well, that's a legitimate question. It definitely deserves an answer. The conversation about safety has to include safe from whom or safe from what. When a congregation says we need to protect our members, it needs to examine whether the people being excluded are the ones most in need of protection. And, it's not easy when you're working in the streets helping people. Sometimes the most dangerous things on Green Street or Broad Street or under the J.C. Calhoun Bridge are not the people asking for help. Sometimes the most dangerous thing are the people who think that they're doing God's work by excluding those people, pushing them out, trying to keep them away. Sometimes it's also that theology that tells us to keep our door closed is the most dangerous thing. To be insular, not to help those most in need. Side note, we're going to jump segments, Reverend Mark, to segment 7. Because we're running low on time now. But we'll pick up here. So just for a brief recap, sanctuary is biblical, ancient, historically practiced, and urgently needed right now. The church does not get to be neutral when people are being hunted, expelled, and discarded. And if your congregation is not asking who in your community needs sanctuary right now, you start asking. You be the change in the church. Yep. If someone needs sanctuary, pastoral care, prayer, connection to a community, you can reach out to myself or Reverend Mark. Our information is online. You can always find these episodes at pod.myocci.social and Reverend Podcast and Apple Podcasts or wherever you find your podcast. You can always join us live on Saturday evenings at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on younow.com/Bishop Greg and on TikTok at Expanding Your Faith. Thank you, Reverend Mark, for being here this evening and joining us.
Thank you, Bishop, for hosting.
Always a pleasure. And thank you, everyone who joined us online. And I hope you'll join us again. Remember, this is the last podcast for Season 13. Next season, Season 14, starts in June, the first Saturday in June. And we're going to be starting off with our typical June discussion about LGBT issues in the church. And several different topics through the month of June about various aspects of LGBT and religion and church. So I'm looking forward to that. So until we once again attempt to expand your faith, keep shining bright, my friends.
Thanks for spending this time with us on Expanding Your Faith. If today's conversation encouraged you, share the episode. It helps more people find the show. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts, and you can also find us online at pod.myocci.social and ourstfrancis.org. Follow us on Facebook at Expanding Your Faith. Our producer is Bishop Ben Williams. Expanding Your Faith is an outreach ministry of St. Francis Parish and Outreach in Augusta, Georgia, produced in cooperation with the Metropolitan Community Church of Our Redeemer in Augusta, Georgia. Until next time, keep expanding your faith.